And we're recording! Hi everyone, and welcome to the YouTube channel for the Super Relaxed Fantasy Club. It's a writing salon that usually meets Central London first Tuesday of the month, and of course that hasn't been possible, so we've been doing readings and such like online instead, which has been great fun. I'm G.V. Anderson. I am a speculative fiction writer. I've won a World Fantasy Award, a British Fantasy Award, and this year I was nominated for a Nebula. And with me is the wonderful Priya Sharma. Priya, did you want to introduce and say hello?
I'm Priya Sharma. Thanks for having me, Gemma. Thanks for asking me to join you today. I've won a British Fantasy Award and a Shirley Jackson Award. I tend to write in somewhere between horror, fantasy, maybe a little bit of sci-fi, weird fiction. I'm not very good at where I sit, really. I think I'm a little bit...
Yeah, it's always a Priya Sharma story, and that is... that is how you describe it.
Yeah, I'm not very good at... Yeah, I'm not very good at colouring within the lines.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad that you said yes to chatting to me. One of the things that made me want to ask you is that you've just been nominated for a Shirley Jackson Award for your novella Orm Shadow. Congratulations! How do you feel?
I was really surprised, I'll be honest with you, because it's a bit of a funny... I think it's a bit of a hard sell, Orm Shadow, and I think I was really delighted that Tor took it. I mean, I think the thing is, it's fantasy, but it's not pure fantasy. It's historical, but it's not a pure historical novel. It's not an easy sell, really. So I was quite surprised when the Shirley Jackson sort of team picked it up. I'll be honest with you. I'm delighted, pleased.
I'm not surprised. I loved it. It was genuinely one of my favourites from last year. I really loved it.
Oh, thanks very much. Thank you.
It was so good. And it kind of feels like it's almost taken from like folklore. And I wondered while I was reading it, was it based on anything? Because for anyone who's listening who may not have read it, it's kind of about a dragon who has landed on British shores and has fallen asleep and has been there so long that they've sort of become part of the land. And I wondered if that was based on anything in particular or where the idea came from.
The idea actually came from, it was time when I was doing a lot of, we were going out to Llandudno and that part of the coast around Wales quite a lot. And there is actually, the Great Orme is a piece of land there. There's the Great Orme and the Little Orme. And it looks like, in profile, it looks like a dragon with its snout in the sea, kind of resting. And Orm apparently is the old Norse word for worm or orm, which is dragon. And I just had this weird little thing in my head about a child whispering in the ear of this dragon. And I was, at the time, I think I was reading some of Robert Westall's books, his short stories, and some of them were almost like morality tales, and that sort of stayed with me. And I had this idea of something kind of almost supernatural, righting wrongs, and being a confidant to this child, and you know, this great, I don't know, spoilers here, but you know, a big event that shakes everything up. So it festered for quite a long time, that one. So yeah, it was all made up, but it is very much rooted in a piece of land, a real place.
I really love the trope of finding yourself in like a giant's ear and like talking. And like I don't know if you've ever seen Hilda on Netflix.
No, what's that? Tell me about it.
It's a really, really lovely animated show about a girl who she lives with her mum it's kind of based on like Scandinavia, but it's not, and she's friends with all the monsters and things, and eventually they have to go to the city, and she's really upset because she's leaving behind all of her monsters, which she associates with the country. It's kind of about her journey in finding the magic in a city. and finding the monsters of a city. It's really lovely. It's based on graphic novels, but the animated series is fantastic.
That sounds really beautiful. I've never heard of it.
It's lovely. It's on Netflix if you have that, and yeah, it's really enjoyable. But early on, there is she meets a giant and she ends up in its ear. Yeah, so she's talking and the giant's like, "Who's shouting?" You know. I really love that trope, and I think that played out really well in Orm Shadow.
Oh, thanks. I was kind of, because I think as a child I loved Roald Dahl, but I was a bit too old for, you know, the what's the name of the giant?
The Big Friendly Giant?
Big Friendly Giant. I was a little bit too young for that. But as an adult, when I saw that, I was like, oh God, that is absolutely beautiful. Yeah. And I loved that idea of, you know, this big entity that's very caring and, you know, that bond.
Yeah. And I always wondered, like, when it was set, because I don't know if there is ever a year that's kind of stated, but it comes across as sort of a late Victorian-y sort of.
Yeah, it was kind of, I was sort of dithering really, and I didn't want to pin it down too much. I think it was, I think probably maybe late Georgian. I mean, there is the kind of, I think you could probably see something Victorian in it in terms of, you know, the collector, you know, the man he used to work for, you know, Gideon's father, with his glass cases full of butterflies. I mean, that all feels quite Victorian, doesn't it? But I was deliberately quite ambiguous. I mean, growing up as a teenager, I kind of got a bit kind of obsessed with Thomas Hardy. And there's loads of bits of that, I think, that influence and that era in it. You know, I like that kind of feel, and I wanted some of that.
I think it gives you a lot of freedom as well, because you don't necessarily have to pin yourself into a particular social or political sort of period. You know, if you're going for something that is sort of timeless, like something that's to do with folklore, it helps to have something that is a little bit ambiguous, I think.
Definitely, and I think I'm certainly no scholar, you know, and I think, you know, you can tell when you read, you know, Sarah Waters or I mean, Alison Littlewood's written some books set in the Victorian era that are really good. You know, The Hidden People and The Crow Garden. You get a real sense of, you know, the era. I mean, I think the Hidden People starts at the Crystal Palace during the Great Exhibition and really roots it in that time. But obviously, she's clearly done a lot of quite meticulous research. Whereas I think, I don't want to get too bogged down in that, really.
Yeah, no, I'm the same, because I do like writing historically, but I don't like research.
But it's funny because your story in, you know, the Dark and Stormy Nights collection.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, that's quite interesting for its Cornish, you know, the Cornish wreckers.
So that was basically, I'd watched too much Poldark.
Is that where it came from?
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking, oh, Daphne, this is quite Daphne du Maurier, you know, Jamaica in, and no, but that's great, isn't it? And that's the wonders of period TV, because I'm sure I've watched things that I've squirreled away.
Yeah.
But you know, just even if it's a ticking clock on a mantelpiece, that's kind of inhabited my head when I'm writing a little bit, you know.
Yeah. Jamaica in, though, definitely, because it's that that horror that she feels. Sorry to spoil it, but it's an old book.
It's not read it by now. What are you doing?
But it's that horror that she feels when she realizes that they're using the lights to kind of guide the boat, and it's that awful moment where she's like, do I stay, do I help, do I, you know, what do you do? So yeah, that was very much an influence for that particular story. But yeah,
a lot of landscape in that as well. You know, when you wrote, I think at one point you described one of the characters as a seam of copper.
Yes, yeah.
And you know, he was imbued with the landscape, and there's and when you were talking about his wife, you know, she had those metal elements. I think that she had eyes like tin at one point.
Yeah, I think I went for copper for him, and the wife had tin as like a cleaner colour.
Yeah, that
Uh,
was really clever, and again, really sort of rooted in the landscape, which I
mm,
really love in writing. I've got
oh,
a real special place.
thank you. Yeah, that's Goldog. It's all that mining. But we touched on this a little bit when we were messaging before the call. But you seem equally comfortable with horror that's contemporary and horror that's historical. Orm Shadow sort of it crosses the line between horror and fantasy, but it's very much historical. But you seem equally comfortable with things like Fabulous Beasts and The Crow Palace, which are rooted in sort of the present day.
Yeah, I kind of, I'm not sure which I enjoy more, really. I don't. Have you got any feelings about it? Because obviously, you know, you do the same. You know, I've read stuff of yours that is very contemporary. You know, the thing you place for tour,
Yeah.
in Hard Ground's contemporary, whereas
Mm.
obviously all things aren't that I've read of yours.
It's interesting because my latest story that I've had out is in Nightmare magazine. It's called We the Folk, and it's based in 1930s Somerset, and it's based around a folk piece of Dorset folklore called the Dorset Oozer, Osser. No one really knows how to say it. And originally that was contemporary horror. I wrote it on like quite a rough council estate, and it was about two sisters, and they were kind of dealing with things in the family, and it just, I don't know why, but writing contemporary, it always feels a little bit more cynical to me. Just the modern day voice changes, you know, the narrative voice changes and becomes more cynical when I write something that's set in present day, versus if I write something that's historical, the voice becomes a little bit more distant. And I don't know why. And sometimes some stories just suit certain voices better, I suppose.
Do you feel that when you're reading other people's work, do you feel, or is that for you as a writer, feeling that cynicism?
I think, well, yeah, I think it's probably both. I mean, I can't think of any books off the top of my head that are historical but have a modern voice.
Yeah.
And I think it just comes naturally that if you're setting something in the modern day, you slip more easily into your natural voice because we live in the present, versus the past, where you kind of put on a character when you're even writing it. But for some reason, with that particular story, the historical aspect made it more scary.
Yeah.
And I know we spoke about this a little bit, but it's that remove, isn't it? It's that remove from what's familiar. You can't quite touch the past. It's kind of lost to you, so therefore it's a little bit more uncanny.
Yeah. I'm interested by your choice of the 1930s as well, because I don't think it's a period that, you know, obviously I know a lot of historical horror fiction, it goes back much further, doesn't it, really? I mean, I can't think off the top of my head, and I don't pretend to be well read in horror, in horror fiction particularly, but the 1930s is an interesting choice. Why did you pick that?
So I think I picked it because one of the plot points is the treatment of war neurosis after World War One. Okay. So I knew that it needed to be kind of interwar period. I think I went for 30s because I wanted it to be like I wanted to have a certain passage of time from like the end of the war to like the point where it's like you know, people are still affected by what happened, but the generations have moved on a little bit. But I didn't want it to get so far that it's now in World War II sort of turmoil. So it's like early 30s. You know, the glitzy times of the 20s are over, and it's getting a little bit more dismal and miserable.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Because Ali Whitley, have you read The Arrival of Missives?
I haven't. No, I've read. Oh, what was her one? What's the one that's got the skin in the title? This is so embarrassing. She's
no, because I'm embarrassed because I brought that up, but I can't remember whether that was post World War One. or
Sorry.
Pre. I think it was Pre actually. So yeah, I'm just talking rubbish. Anyway, so ignore that. Ignore that.
And I think you mentioned earlier Sarah Waters, and I'm just going to fangirl. She's absolutely one of my. She's absolutely incredible, and I love her. And one of her first novel that I ever read was Paying Guests.
Really interesting, because have you done it backwards then?
I have. So yeah, it came up because Paying Guests was it just sort of come out and it was doing really well, and I read the synopsis. I was like, oh, that sounds like the kind of thing I'd really like. And that's late 20s, so you're kind of starting to get into the Depression era, and things aren't going so well, and I think with the 20s as well, you have preconceived ideas about the 20s and what it sounded like and what it looked like, and it's because we see so much of it in film now. The flapper, the cocktail,
without looking at
so kind of going for late 20s, early 30s is a little bit more. You've got a bit more wiggle room to perhaps surprise the reader, because it's not an era that is so well documented, perhaps. But yeah,
a lot of social change as well.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So yeah, Sarah Waters, that was the first Sarah Waters one I read, and I absolutely loved it. And I knew then that was a period, like those 5 years at the end of the 20s and early 30s were like really fascinating. So
definitely. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say I've not read that story of yours particularly. I'll look it up, because it sounds really interesting. And it's funny, isn't it, how switching era on what you're doing, if it doesn't work, actually can really kickstart a story and really reframe everything.
Yeah, and it just I started redrafting a short story the other day that's gone the other way. It started off historical, and I'm now taking it to the 90s.
Why the 90s?
I don't know. Well, I grew up in the 90s, so it kind of feels it feels familiar and modern, but not so modern that everyone has a phone.
Yes. Okay. And do you feel the cynicism coming back into your voice?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I can feel that the voice is more coarse, more brash. For the 90s grunge, like everyone's in cargo pants and army boots. And it's amazing that it's the same story, but it just completely refreshes it. And because it's a story that's based around folklore as well, so it's refreshing the folklore in that it's bringing it into the 90s, where it doesn't sit like 100% comfortably.
You mentioned folklore a lot.
Yes.
For you, is that a big cornerstone to what you do?
It's become a cornerstone. It never used to be. I used to be very much epic fantasy, loved world building, and I still do. But there's something about folklore that is just a little bit eerie, and that it's very close to our world, but not really. It's like the closest thing we have kind of to magic.
Yeah.
Very
much so.
Yeah, like leaving like bowls of milk out and things like that's the closest thing we have to a charm or a spell or something like that, and it just feels really lovely to write about it, I think.
Definitely. And it's funny, isn't it, because I don't think I know enough about kind of world folklore. I know little bits here and there, but it's not something I've ever really studied. I know, do you know V.H. Leslie?
No.
She wrote I think she's a writer who she wrote a really lovely, name's gone out of my head, but her collection's up for a British Fantasy Award, and she wrote a really good short novel with Salt about kind of the water cure for women. But I think her PhD was actually in Finnish folklore.
Right, yeah.
And really quite interesting, and I'd love for her to do a novel based around that. So if you're ever watching,
yeah, no, I do. I've become more into folklore. I think it's I think I studied it a little bit in college, because we did I did performing arts in college, and we had one assignment where it was like, go off and find some folklore and make a little play about it. And I think like there's a couple of things from my local area that have kind of stuck with me. And also the smugglers are very much part of the South Coast folklore mythology. So reading Jamaica in when I was like 14 was like, yeah, this is basically like my area.
Yeah.
And also my family, my maternal family comes from the village that is said to be where Robin Hood married Maid Marian.
Wow.
Yeah, Edwinstowe in Nottinghamshire. So there's always, I've always loved like Robin Hood type stuff because it's always felt like really close.
It's interesting. I did not know that about you. The fact you've done a performing arts course basically here. Mm-hmm. How does that inform your writing? Because does it help you to inhabit characters? Anything that you learned in that period?
I suppose so. I mean, I wasn't very good at the performing arts. I think I'm too inhibited to be particularly good at it. But I think it helps with getting into a character and trying to keep a consistent voice through, because you've once you find a characterization for a certain character, I mean that's one of the things they taught us really early, is that like you decide on your characterizations, you decide on your accent or phrasings or things that you might do, and then you don't use them as a crutch, but you make sure that they come back enough that they are part of the character and the way they are. So that is something that, when I sit down and make a character, I'm going to be like, well, their speech patterns is going to be a bit like this, or they're going to have a sort of a tick that they're always going to rely on when they get nervous and things like this, and in that way it helps characters stay consistent, at least in the first draft.
And it must help in terms of around that characters and giving them individuality, because I worry that sometimes when I write dialogue, I'm always speaking with my own voice, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, you get into the thing of like, I mean, the dialogue is being relayed to the reader as direct speech, but it's still going through the filter of the narrator.
Yeah.
So that's your get out.
I'm going to quote you on that in future. I'm just,
write it. But yeah, so I guess it in some ways it kind of informs, but in other ways I don't know. I think it probably the studying English more.
Clearly that whole experience of creation there.
Yeah.
You've carried that with you, and that's part of you, isn't it?
Yeah. How do you feel about doing some questions from our not audience? So I know that you're not active on Twitter, but there is a great deal of love there for you. Whenever your name comes up, there is always people tweeting saying, Priya Sharma, amazing, all the fabulous these, what a great collection. So when I put out that I was talking to you for the channel, I had a couple of questions that it might be fun to see what we come up with. So some of the questions were a bit similar, just worded a little bit differently. So the most common question that came up came from Marianne Womack, Rebecca Harrison, and Isabel Yap. What books would you say were formative for you as a writer?
I think definitely Roald Dahl as a child. That was my kind of. I remember reading all the standard stuff as a kid, like Enid Blyton and all that kind of stuff that was in school. But I think when I read Danny the Champion of the World by Roald Dahl, that kind of set me on that path, and then pretty rapidly into his Tales of the Unexpected. In my early teens, The Colour Purple, actually, by Alice Walker, and I'd never read anything like that wrote about race, wrote about abuse in that way, and that was very powerful. That really floored me, actually. I'm just trying to think who else. I mean, I had a a fantasy phase through my teens, very much. But I think the books that really sort of stayed with me, I think when I started reading Ian Banks in my teens, that was, you know, The Wasp Factory was the first one that I read and just loved that. But other writers like H.E. Bates, which is probably not very fashionable to say that, but you know, because everyone thinks of, you know, The Darling Bloods of May. But his short stories were amazing. He wrote a really tremendous book, again, I read as a teen, called The Feast of July, about a girl and three brothers. That, again, I'd never, I mean, it felt very, very English, obviously, because it's H.E. Bates, but very rooted in, you know, we talk about historical fiction and other times, other places, something that's gone. In the way that I felt when I read Cider with Rosie by Laurie Lee, you know, writers like that. I'm just trying to think who else.
Did you read much fiction, or was it mostly novels?
You know what? It's funny because I think that I tried The Hobbit as a teenager. Early teens. I hated it, and then slogged my way. And this isn't really popular, through Lord of the Rings. Didn't particularly enjoy it, actually. Do you feel the same?
I love the films.
Yeah, I do.
The books were really hard going. I remember I think I read The Fellowship and The Two Towers, and I never read Return of the King. But the films were fantastic.
Yeah, and I agree, and you know, I can see why it's important and all of those things, and you know, his, you know, what he was doing, you know, to create something on that scale. I actually prefer Mervyn Peake.
Yeah.
You know, books.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to drop me on a desert island, it wouldn't be.
I remember those were the first books where I literally needed a thesaurus. Like, to
crazy,
me, when I was reading it, yeah,
absolutely crazy. But yeah, so just a really unique, strange world. Very, very odd. Did you ever see the BBC dramatisation?
I did. Yeah, I did. I mean, I by that time it had been a long time since I'd read Gormenghast, so I kind of came to it quite fresh, which was nice.
Yeah.
Come to it bogged down with like, well, it shouldn't have been like that, but I did like it. I think they captured the mood really well, especially like the opening when he kind of shuffles in. Like all of the lighting, I think, was really well done as well. It just made it look really gloomy, and I think more than anything is if you get the atmosphere right with Mervyn Peake, you're pretty much there.
Yeah, I mean, I did. I mean, I liked it, but I have to say, I kind of, it's one of those things I'd love to go back and read again now, to see if it sort of lives up to my expectation of it, my memory of it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what else really had a big impact on me. Thomas Hardy, definitely. I read Thomas Hardy, not sort of Jane Austen.
Okay.
And yeah, not that I've got any problem with sort of the Brontes or, but I remember my mum, I don't know what she was thinking. She gave me the Mary Casterbridge when I was about 13. It's not a happy book, is it? You know.
No.
You know, but
I was like reading Tales of the D'Urbervilles when I was like 15 and being like, what is this?
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm trying to think what else I read in my teens that I really loved. I think have you read The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende?
No, I haven't. Tell me more.
No, that's brilliant. And it's really, and you're gonna laugh at me. I remember reading an interview, I think it might have been with Nick Rhodes from Duran Duran or someone like that. And not that I was a massive Duranie, but and he was talking about this mind-boggling book, and it's really beautiful and it's magical realism. And you know, it's very political. Yeah, just check it out if you've not read it.
And what was the name of that one again?
It's The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende.
You've heard it here first, folks.
It's not a kind of a new, you know. Anyway, yeah. So I remember that and reading and thinking, what is this? What is she doing here? You know, we've got sort of talking dogs, we've got ghosts, we've got political violence, all these things, you know, going on at once.
I remember one of the books that really blew my mind as a writer was China Miéville's Railsea. I don't know if you've read that.
I have to admit, and again, this is really awful, I've not read any of his work.
I would really recommend Railsea because it's really, it's very accessible in a way that his other meteor books are not. But Railsea is basically, it's Moby Dick, but it's trains.
That's curious. I mean, I've got a copy of Peridot Street Station knocking around here.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting for the time when, you know, I can dedicate myself to a big, meaty kind of tome. But yeah, maybe something like that is a better place to start, I think.
Yeah. I loved Railsea because the word "and" is always written as an ampersand.
Oh.
And it's never really explained. It's just that's how it is in that world. But just at the end, they mentioned that it's because they hold trains and train tracks as kind of holy, and the ampersand looks like a train track, which is why. Which is why it's become the word "and," and they now no longer spell it out with AND. And I remember thinking, God, that just breaks so many fourth wall barriers, and it's so weird. And I don't know, like just that tiny little creative world building touch just blew my mind because it pushed the boundary of what world building could do.
Yeah.
It could literally affect the symbols and the spellings of things.
Yeah, that is really, really, that's really curious. I have to do it. I have to.
Yeah, you should. It's Moby Dick, but it's trains and the whales are giant moles.
Okay. That's a very strange sell. I like. Oh, Clive Barker for me. He was another one.
Yeah.
In terms of horror, I think.
Yeah.
I mean Stephen King as well, but I think I went through a huge phase in my teens of reading Stephen King, but then I read Weave World.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so lovely because that was set in places in England. And it was just bonkers.
Yeah.
It was unlike anything else I'd read. And then I read the Books of Blood. Angela Carter as well. She was another one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. So we've done formative books. Isabel Yap also asked what kind of what your favorite types of stories, what kind of genres do you seek out, and what do you read for fun and comfort?
That's like saying what's your favorite food. I clearly love food. And you know, I couldn't say that I have one thing that I love to read. I mean, I'm not, this is probably going to sound a bit weird, but I don't read tons of horror, and I don't read stacks of fantasy. I mean, I love, I'm trying to think what I've read recently that I've really enjoyed. Oh, in fact, I kept this handy. The Body and Other Parties.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
I have, yes. I love Carmen Maria Machado.
Yeah, absolutely. And I went through a phase last year reading a lot of stuff by a guy called Sian Jones, who's a poet. But he writes this amazing prose. All his novels are very short, but the language is just beautiful. It's really intense. I'm trying to think what else I've got lined up on my bookshelf to read. I'm just a bit of a magpie, really. I mean, I'm not. I think I need to break my snobbery around romantic fiction. Because I do think I'm a little bit kind of. I'd rather read a thriller or you know, something that is science fiction or fantasy, or you know. But I'm not very good at what you find on the romance section, and I think good writing transcends genre. So I should really put myself out there.
Have you ever read My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante? Did you ever watch the series?
No.
Oh, it's that is probably one of the books I would recommend for getting into. I mean, it's not romance, but it's like basically the lives of two girls growing up in post World War II Naples, and the boyfriends they have and the problems they have and all that kind of things, and it is really, really well done. It's like you say, it transcends genre. It doesn't, you know, it's just written so beautifully.
And that's the thing, isn't it? I think I've perhaps developed a bit of a snobbery around romance, which is wrong. You know, it's like people saying, well, horror's, you know, there's only one type of horror, and, you know, I'm not going to go there, which, you know, it's clearly not true.
I have a good recommendation for fantasy romance, if romance is a bit too much. Fantasy romance, I would recommend Empire of Sand and Realm of Ash by Tasha Suri.
Okay, I'll look that up.
And that was really brilliant. Did you ask the title?
Empire of Sand, did you say?
Yeah, Empire of Sand. And that is a secondary world fantasy that's kind of based on the like Muggle era, with dance magic, sand magic, and it's got loads of like romance tropes, like, you know, the arranged marriage where he's actually the man of your dreams and that kind of thing.
I'll check it out.
So that was a really good comfort read. For me, the books that I tend to go towards for some reason are crime. I really like reading a good thriller, procedural, detective-y kind of thing. I'm reading Making Wolf by Talia Thompson at the moment, and it is absolutely fantastic and so much fun. And so far, there isn't anything speculative about it.
But he's just a bit talented anyway, isn't he?
Oh, he's amazing, yeah. I'll read his shopping list, basically. But yeah, that is about a young guy who travels back to his childhood country in West Africa to go to a family funeral. And while he's there, he says, oh yeah, I'm with the police in London, I'm, you know, big shot detective. And he gets embroiled in a murder investigation where everyone's like, you're police, you can sort it out. And he has actually no experience as a police officer or a detective other than the films he's watched.
I love it.
Yeah, it's just
a departure from his other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, so far it doesn't have any sort of speculative elements so far, but he's just one of those writers that can kind of turn his hand to anything. He did Murders of Molly Southbourne, like horror sort of fantasy, then Rosewater, which was really out there science fiction, and now he's a thriller writer apparently, and he's just brilliant.
Time is where it's at, isn't it, at the moment?
I know. And one last question, which came to us from Rebecca Harrison. This is a good one if you like Philip Pullman. She wondered what your demon would be if you were from his Dark Materials world.
I think my demon will probably be, I'd like it to be an otter, but it's probably a honey badger.
Oh.
They're just ridiculous. They think they can take anything on.
Yeah.
And they're just a bit random. But it probably wouldn't be anything as smart as an otter or a honey badger. Might be a sloth.
There's nothing wrong with being a sloth. They're great animals. They have been around a long time. They have cracked the code.
Yeah, they are strange looking creatures, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably my demon. What about you?
I remember I did, you know, there's always those quizzes like, what's your demon? I did one of those years and years ago, and it came out with a rabbit, and for some reason I sort of saw that and went, okay, and it kind of stuck. So I think like a small nervous creature that sort of shakes and runs. And
although have you read Watership Down?
Yes.
So yeah, you've got nothing to shake and all that, just get in there.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that would probably be my demon. So I'm a rabbit, and we're thinking that Priya is a sloth.
She's not really sure what she is. She's not very good. She can't even decide on her own demon.
Well, that was the questions that we had, Priya, and I think we're probably coming up on our time now. Is there anything that you'd like to promote or give a shout out to before we sign off?
I'm just trying to think of, well, I'd certainly say to everyone, look out for Julie Anderson's story coming up with Tor. Hearts in the Hard Ground. When is it going to be out?
It's out in September. They have told me the date, but I can't remember it. But it's September, and it will be online and in ebook.
Good luck with it. Because it's lovely when you see their artwork. And
thank you. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It's been really great working with them, and it's so exciting.
And thank you for asking me to join you. I mean, I could just go on chatting to you because you're lovely.
Oh, thank you. No, I just wish that I had a paid account, and then we could be like an unlimited conversation, but I'm a cheapskate.
It's all right, so am I.
But yeah, so thank you so much, Priya, for joining me and for talking to me and giving up some of your Thursday evening, and good luck with whatever you're working on at the moment. Are you in the middle of something, or?
Yeah, I've got a few short stories on the go at the moment, and I have to say my kind of rate of work at the moment isn't kind of what I want it to be, but we're getting there slowly. It's unpicking the puzzle, trying to work out what I need to do with what, but I'll get there eventually.
Well, good luck. I really look forward to reading them.
You take care.
Yeah, signing off now. Bye everyone. Thank you for joining us.